Live. Woo. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm gonna give a couple minutes for people to trickle in here.
Hey guys, so as we start to kick off here, I just want to welcome everybody. My name is Ron Gray. I'm the VP of Sales with CannaCraft. I'm sure I've met a lot of you before, and I would look forward to meeting the rest of you. Really quick, my background is from pharmaceuticals, running pharmaceutical sales teams, and then entering into the cannabis space. And really in pharma, we lived and died by the numbers. You know, IMS was one of the major reporting services, and that data was incredible for us with the decisions that we can make, planning, and really about future products, what's working, trending, just so much that we could learn. And now here we are in cannabis, and Headset is doing an incredible job for us. And it's not just the daily numbers that we can look at and really keep track of, but they also have other things that they can do for us and really drill down for us particularly, not the industry-wide, but give us information about our business and what we're doing and maybe what we should be doing. So we found tremendous benefit there. And we thought it'd be really good to open this up to our partners and allow you guys to have some experience with Headset as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Jocelyn Sheltrop. Jocelyn is the Director of Industry Relations with Headset, and she's going to start to kick it off.
Awesome. Let's do this. Okay, let's just roll here. I'm going to shut off my video for a second. And awesome. Okay, guys. Yeah, Ron, thank you so much for that opening. You guys have been such great partners to us, so it's so stoked that we're doing this. You know, I've gotten to know several of the CannaCraft team members over the years, and when we came together to build out the content for this webinar, you know, we spent a lot of time thinking about what value we could provide from both of our companies' experiences and knowledge. And through this, we just had several moments of appreciation for everyone working in the California market, and just how many uncontrollables have to be forged to run a successful operation here. It is truly mind-blowing working in this industry, but so much fun. But with this, you know, I'd really like to start by just taking a moment to acknowledge the last year in California. So if we go back a year ago, you know, at the start of the pandemic, the stay-at-home orders went into effect mid-March. And if you lived in Northern California, you might remember that brief one-day retail shutdown that we had in San Francisco, until of course the city realized, no, cannabis is essential, y'all can open again. Then we had the wildfires throughout the state. We saw farms like Wham and Santa Cruz lose their entire crop. We had looting at the end of May in LA and Northern California. I live in Oakland, and I have to say it was just devastating to see the destruction. You know, Magnolia was broken into twice over a 2-day period. Nug reported losing over $2 million in a raid. Cookies was raided by a 20-person militia crew. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And this just resulted in changes in what products people are buying, how often they purchase, and where they purchase from. And these uncontrollables, this has made it really challenging to run a retail store or to build a brand. And it's also made it hard for data companies like Headset to predict the markets. But despite all this, what's really incredible, it's not just the resiliency and the passion that exists within the industry, but it's how quickly legal markets are maturing. And this maturation, this is forcing all of us to keep up by innovating our technologies, innovating our products, and our mindsets. And this is why I'm just so excited for the insights, the data-driven perspectives that our teams are going to share today. So innovation, this is in our DNA at Headset. We've been building the most sophisticated analytics software over the last 6 years, and our founders, Cy, Brian, and Scott, who you can see here, they also founded Leafly together. And so the three have been building cannabis tech companies for over 10 years, which is really quite unique. And so at Headset, you know, we're offering a suite of analytics capabilities. We've got a couple different products. We've got tools for retailers so they can understand their store sales, their customers. We've got a platform for brands to collaborate with their retail partners so they can see their inventory performance in real time in their stores. And this is actually a tool that CannaCraft is using. I know they'd love to connect with all their retail partners. And then lastly, we've got a platform for all cannabis operators to understand sales and customer trends in real time. And given all those uncontrollables that I just mentioned, this has been really important for us, all of us working in the industry, so that we can understand these changing trends, so that we can pivot and adapt our businesses. So today our team is going to walk through various sales trends. Everything is going to be pulled from our insights platform, as well as some insights that are derived from reports in our retailer software. And all of the data referenced today, this is sourced via our 1,800 plus retail partners throughout the US and Canada. And this data is put through an extensive process that you can see here, which very simply put, is a combination of humans, robots, and AI to cleanse, normalize, project, and protect all the data. So to kick us off, Headset Senior Analyst Blake Ferry is going to talk about some assortment fundamentals. He's going to talk about a couple common methodologies that retailers use to determine the right assortment in their stores. He's going to cover the 80-20 rule, ABC XYZ analysis, and then give everyone a few tips and trends to really help you nail your assortment this summer. Then we've got Sammy Tavola, our principal data analyst. He's going to walk through some tactics to measure a brand's reach. And then Liz Connors, our VP of Analytics, is going to close out Headset's portion by sharing insights into top brands and summer trends. And then last, but certainly not least, Angela Fee, CMO of CannaCraft. I had the pleasure of meeting up with Angela a few weeks ago, and I just loved learning about their company ethos. There's so much good stuff going on at CannaCraft. And she's going to talk about the CannaCraft family of brands and some really interesting trends that they see amongst their customers. And I just have to say, among many things that make CannaCraft unique, one is that they represent brands across every category, as you can see here. And what is so cool about this is that they partner with their retailers to create inventory assortment that's going to best suit their customers' store base. And so you're going to learn from Angela that customer acquisition, retention, this is a function of your inventory strategy. And you're also going to learn from her that CannaCraft customers, they buy more on average. So picking your brands thoughtfully is very important because they're here to help you drive more store revenue. And so with all that said, I'm going to kick it over to you, Blake.
Great. Thanks, Joss. So my name is Blake Ferry, as Joss mentioned. I work here at Headset on our data science team. And today I'm going to walk through really, I guess, inventory management kind of fundamentals, which is really paramount, particularly this time of year as we go into summer. That's the busiest season of the year for cannabis retail. And so along with that, I really want to set the stage by kind of asking you to do kind of a thought exercise, which is to think about two scenarios for me. So on one end of the spectrum, I want you to think about a store with like wall-to-wall display cases. So filled with the capacity of like everything possible, every brand, kind of like the apex of consumer choice, right? And so why we like to assume that this scenario, like consumers want the most choice, right? We want to empower them to make whatever decision they'd like by giving them the most choice. This often is kind of a misnomer. Consumers don't necessarily want that experience, and they often feel really overwhelmed in that scenario. But on the other side, let's imagine something on the other end of the spectrum, right? So if something, let's say you walk into a store and there's maybe 3 SKUs in every category. So that's also really not a good consumer shopping experience, right? There's almost no choice in products, and that likely results in the customer being frustrated, not feeling like they are getting something they want. So the answer to that of what makes the most sense, it really is, like many things in life, it kind of lies somewhere in between those two extremes. And that's why inventory management is really often, people bring up like the Goldilocks dilemma, which is, too small, not good, too little, too small, not good, too big, not good. Again, kind of that sweet spot really is in the middle. And so we can actually kind of prove out what that sweet spot is with data in retail. And we often find that retailers tend to actually err on the side of having too much consumer choice, which you can go ahead and flip it, Joss, to the next one there. And that's what we're going to start by talking about here. So just let's set the stage and get a sense of scale for how many products are retailers stocking in their store. So here what we're looking at is in the trailing 90 days, we're looking at the number of distinct products in stock in the median retailer in each of these markets. So you can see California there is highlighted with 700 SKUs, or I should say products, unique products. And you can see, I'm quickly just going to talk about the bookends, so to speak here. So if we look at Washington, that's about 1,600 SKUs. It's a very, very large number. And the fun fact about Washington, 1,600, you could argue is way too much, but this actually comes from another analyst on my team, so I'm not going to take credit for this, but I learned that 1,600 SKUs, that's just again trailing 90 days. So if we think about a year and that median retailer in Washington, a Trader Joe's actually will stock fewer SKUs than that cannabis retailer in Washington. So that gives you just a sense of inventory management in certain places. And then on the other side of things, you have vertically on the right, as we go down that kind of sliding scale there, you see a lot of Canadian markets. You'll see New Mexico, Florida. Those are, again, in the US, they're really heavily vertically integrated markets. So where there's really not very much choice for consumers. But again, that's just to give you a sense of where California lies, which is really up around the high end of things. And so all that is to say that inventory managers really, and I personally believe this, inventory managers really do have, inventory managers at cannabis retailers, I should say, have one of the hardest jobs in retail. Like it's super challenging to manage upwards of hundreds, maybe even 1,000 SKUs, and let alone be measuring the product efficacy over every inventory cycle, making sure you're measuring the sales performance, you understand how much the inventory levels of each of those products, and then you're also every 2 weeks turning around and saying, all right, well, I know what worked and what didn't work, and I'm going to optimize that every 2 weeks. And just that process of how we think about getting the right SKUs into our store is really the crux of the problem that we're going to be walking through today. We can flip it to the next slide. Sweet. So what we're looking at here, and so now, I guess now that we have a sense of how many SKUs are in stores, let's think about like, okay, there's 700 SKUs in the median retailer in California. What does that mean? What percent of those SKUs are really contributing to sales? Is it all of them? Are they all equally performing well? Or is it some, distinct group of these SKUs that's really accounting for a lot of sales? And this is, again, a way to help retailers understand like what's important in my store, right? What's driving my growth? And so before we kind of dig into that specifically, I want to just introduce this concept, which is something that Josh had alluded to in the intro there, which is the Pareto Principle, which is more commonly known as the 80-20 rule. And so the principle itself is actually named after a 19th century Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto. And besides having an incredibly awesome name, he was the one that originally kind of theorized this idea that about 80% of outputs are really driven by about 20% of inputs. So his original application was wealth disparity, but this concept has been applied for centuries now across all different types of business models, industries, and it's particularly relatable to cannabis and traditional CPG. And so that's where, when we look at this, so why we don't see a clean 80-20, and that again is kind of, we wouldn't expect a clean 80-20. That's just kind of the rule of thumb, so to speak. But what we see here is, if we look at California, for example, we can see that it's about a third of SKUs account for the top 80% of sales in retail in California in cannabis. And so to say that another way, that means about 2/3 of products in California make up the long tail of sales, so the last 20%. So these are SKUs that vast majority of SKUs are driving very small amounts of revenue, and a small proportion are actually driving a disparate amount of revenue. So let's just bridge the gap between this slide and the previous one, and that is that we kind of objectively now we know two things about California, right? We know that retailers stock a really wide variety of products. So again, that's a 700 number. And we also know that only about a third of those products are really responsible for the vast majority of our revenue that we see. And so on this next slide here, we're actually going to take this one step further. And so on this slide, now we're looking at the percentage of products that were in stock but had no sales in the last 90 days in median retailer in each of these markets. So again, we can see California is there kind of on the upper middle kind of area there. About 14% of SKUs didn't have sales in the last 90 days that were in stock. So that's it. So now let's put this in perspective, right? So let's do some math. So we know that the median retailer in California stocked 700 unique products in the last 90 days. And we also know that about 14% of those products didn't have any sales. So that means that roughly 98 products, so again, these are products, not units, so that the units would be a much larger number, Those are sitting in the back in the stock room, not driving sales, and they're also tying up working capital for retailers. So if we start to actually think about those numbers and put it into a kind of a monetary value, I'll just work through a quick example. And again, this is not to scare you, and it's not an aggressive scenario. It's also not a very kind of conservative or I guess optimistic view of inventory. It's just kind of somewhere in the middle. But let's just round that 98 number up to 100 to make the math easy. So let's say that there's 100 products that didn't have sales in the last 90 days. Let's say that you have 50 units of each of those products in stock. Let's multiply that by the average item cost, just blended across all categories, which is about $11 in California. That comes out at about $55,000 in tied up inventory costs just that's sitting in the back. So to put that in another term, if we think about that, gross that up into what revenue looks like, right? So accounting for that margin, that's about $140,000. So that's like the opportunity cost of revenue, right? So the difference between those two is about you're not only you're holding $55,000 of cost in the back, but also that equates to about $85,000 of margin, just kind of sitting out there as well. So that I know that is kind of a doom and gloom. There's a lot of numbers in there that seem kind of frightening, right? But I think that the good news is that there are a lot of different ways to understand and solve these problems, right? So the inherent issue in inventory is that it's constantly changing. There's lots of it. And the retailer's ultimate goal is to really provide consumers with what they want, right? And the most important tools we have to distill and understand these inventory problems are inventory frameworks. So one specific inventory framework I'm going to talk about today is called ABC XYZ. And this really helps us cut through all that noise and aggregate data in a way that's easy to understand for retailers, but also is actionable as well. So we can flip to the next one. Yeah, so first things first. So what is ABC XYZ, right? It sounds very generic. Easy to remember though. And so it's really commonly used across tons of different industries, lots of different business applications, really any business where physical inventory is held. This framework is applicable. The analysis that we can do with it is done by, or it's used by everyone, and it could be as applications in finance, data science. There's a wide array here. Inventory management, it goes across the board. And the idea is that it's really designed to help businesses better understand their products, both in terms of how they drive sales, as well as their purchase frequency, and ultimately provides a business with a methodology to objectively compare a product to one another. So the framework itself, which we can flip to the next one here. So the framework itself is, what we're doing is we're taking a product and we're going to assign a two-dimensional grade to it. So this helps us understand relative value of SKUs to one another in inventory, so in a cannabis retailer. So the first dimension that we would assign a grade for a product is ABC. So what ABC means is we're going to assign a grade to a product based on its contribution to category sales. So for example, let's use a flower SKU as an example. If that flower SKU is in the top 70% of sales in flower category, we would assign that an A. That we're saying that SKU is driving a good amount of value within our flower category. And if, let's say, it's on the very tail end, the last 10% of sales, that would get the C grade there. So you can see that low sales value, meaning that SKU is tiny sales, really not a big driver in terms of dollar value. And then that kind of in between, that medium kind of average performer is going to get a B grade. So that's the sales portion of it. So we have an objective way to compare SKUs in terms of the sales that they're driving. But we know that that's not something that we necessarily want to use in isolation, right? Because we know within categories, say like flower, there are different package sizes we kind of need to think about. So an ounce, for example, is going to drive revenue. It might appear to be driving more revenue than maybe it should be. That's just because it has a high item price. It's going to be a low volume seller. But when you look at something like a gram or an eighth, those are priced lower. So they might ultimately could drive maybe incrementally not that much more than, say, ounces, but they sell a lot more. They're in a lot more baskets. They're sold very frequently. So we need to find a way to kind of compensate for that there. We need to find a way to say, okay, yes, this product is a good seller in terms of the dollars it's driving, but we also need to be able to say, okay, is it actually being purchased frequently, right? Is this something that I need to have a lot of inventory of because it's sold frequently? That's where the XYZ comes in there. So the XYZ grading, so we give a SKU a grade, ABC. So let's say that it's an A, for example. Now we need to say, okay, well, what's the velocity of that product? Meaning how frequently is it being purchased? So how we do that is we assign a grade for XYZ based on basket penetration. So how frequently is it being purchased in baskets, these flower as an example, in baskets that contain a flower item. So that category basket penetration. So a product that's in a lot of baskets would get the highest grade, which is X. So that's an optimal kind of grade. And then on the low ends of things, these are items that are sold very infrequently, not in a lot of baskets, category baskets. Those are going to get the Z grade. And then again, kind of that average is around Y, kind of the, I don't want to say mediocre, but, kind of an average performer. And what we can do is we actually combine those grades. We can concatenate them. So let's say that we have a SKU that drives a lot of sale volume and is frequently purchased. So let's say it's our most popular eighth. So that would get an AX, and you can see there on the right, that means that it's high sales value and it's high basket penetration. And so what I would do with those grades, that tells me, okay, if I have a category, so let's say I'm looking at flower, and I have all these SKUs graded out, I know when I go to order inventory, here are the ones that are objectively, I have a relative way to compare them. I know that these are not being purchased very frequently. I know that they're not really driving very many sales dollars. So that tells me, maybe I should rethink about how I would actually purchase this again. Would it be in a smaller inventory amount, so meaning fewer units? Is it something or is this something I just need to kind of just cut out of my inventory because, again, it's just kind of sitting in the back and it's tying up working capital for me. So now that we kind of have an understanding of how a retailer would use that and how the actual grading works, we're going to look at two different stores here. So we can go ahead and flip to the first one here. So this is a California retailer, and what I've done here is I've taken their store and I've taken the grades for their SKUs. This is done on the trailing 60 days. And so what we can see here is the SKU share is that kind of that purple bar, and that teal bar is the sales share the group of the products that have that grade. What's the percentage of total sales that they're driving? So here what we can see is that if we add up those good grades, so those would be the AXs, the AYs, the BXs. So again, when we think about that chart we just saw, it would be kind of those green values in the top right. These grades account for about 60% of products in the store and about 3/4 of the store's revenue, so about 75% of the store's revenue. So that means that these SKUs are great drivers of revenue. So they're driving disproportionate sales for the amount of SKUs that they occupy on shelves, right? And conversely, we can see that if we look at kind of those average and poor graded SKUs, so those orange and red values, kind of trending towards the bottom left of that prior chart, what we can see is that those account for about 40% of the remaining products, right, in terms of the product count, so the product share, and it only accounts for about the last quarter of sales, right? So again, 40% of products in stock have these grades, but they're only driving about 1/4 of revenue in the store. So again, that's just a way we can see how this grading methodology can help us understand what SKUs are important to us. So now if we go to a less than ideal store, which is on the next slide here, there it is. So what we can see here is we see different grading results, and I'm going to kind of summarize them for you because I know that there was a lot of bars going on there. So if we look at this store, we had products with those good grades. So again, the AX, AY, and BX, they account for about 59% of the products, but only about 57% of sales. So if I did a ratio of those two things, well, on the good store, I know that those good graded SKUs are driving disproportionate. So meaning that this SKU share is less than the sales volume share. Here we see that opposite relationship. There's actually a negative ratio of SKU share to sales. And so then if we look at the average and poor performing SKUs in the store, so again, those orange and red values, we can actually see that those account for about 41% of products and 43% of sales. So that tells me that this store, they have a positive ratio on those poor performing SKUs, which means that, they're losing out on driving more revenue through kind of leaning into those good graded products, right? They have a lot in stock of those poor kind of or average performers, which because they have that negative ratio, it tells me, okay, well, or in this case, a positive ratio for the poor grades, it tells me that, okay, I have a lot of okay SKUs or poor performing SKUs occupying shelf space, and I'm dependent on those to drive revenue, which means that there's a lot of fat that could be trimmed there and optimized in order to start to get to, having an inventory where our SKUs are graded out on a higher, kind of that top right, where, fewer SKUs in stock, so less to manage. We know that these are SKUs that, consumers want because we have an objective way to tell us that. And again, that just provides us kind of with the ammunition to say, okay, my next inventory cycle, I need to kind of make some adjustments so that, in the next 2-week cycle, I'm really feeling confident and optimized that I'm going to be driving revenue the right way. Okay, so now that I've really talked about almost every angle of how the retailer thinks about kind of inventory management and kind of frameworks that we can use to address some of the problems inherent with inventory management, we have to kind of now think about the other side of the coin, which is, okay, well, we know that retailers are managing inventory, but we also know brands are managing inventory, right? So in our next speaker here, Sammy, will kind of go through on the brand side, how do they think about kind of that inventory strategy?
Thank you, Blake, and hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm gonna start here with the brand piece. So like Blake said, looking at things from the brand's perspective and how brands can use various tools to understand their reach and also target certain audiences or consumers for their brands. And to keep things simple here, when we talk about brand reach, we're really talking about the total sales that the brand has. So the higher the sales, the higher the reach in this example. And in terms of the sales, can you go back to the previous one, please? In terms of the sales, we do want to look at the decomposition of the sales. So 2 ways the brand can really affect how much the sales are. One, they can get in the new stores and hopefully they're the right stores in terms of their target audience or target consumer, or then they can also try to simultaneously grow the average sales that they are getting from each of the stores they're in. So those are really the 2 dimensions that we're going to be considering in this example. Next slide, please. All right, so Blake talked about the Pareto Principle. This is looking at top 30 brands in flower in California. And there are actually over 2,000 flower brands in California that had any sales in the past year. So you can really see the concentration of the sales volume in the top brands in the state because half of the sales come from the top 30 brands. They're listed there. We're going to be keeping things even more concise by focusing on these brands in the slides that follow. Next slide. Yes. So if you then plot the brands across the 2 dimensions mentioned before, so average sales on the y-axis and total stores, which is the proxy for the distribution on the x-axis, you can see that there's great variation or dispersion in how these different brands plot across these 2 axes in the space. And we have colored some there. There's some helpers there that I'm going to explain when we move forward. So next slide, please. So you can imagine these 4 quadrants and how helpful they are in terms of understanding how the brands position relative to each other. So in the Northeast, you have high distribution, high sales, probably the place where you would want your brand to be, or the desired location, because it's probably the highest in terms of overall sales volume. Obviously, since this is relative ranking, not everybody's going to make it there, but there are reasons to be in the other quadrants as well. Obviously, brands have very different audiences. They may be very niche products in terms of what they offer to the consumer, and wouldn't be something that everybody would be interested in anyway. However, there is strong enough demand that there's a reason for the brand to exist. Or there may be other limitations to the distribution that are driven by things perhaps out of control for the actual producer or the owner of the brand. So this is how we can start to understand the relative reach that the different brands have across these dimensions, and understand the competitive position. And if you're owner of that brand, you're probably always most interested in who is the brand closest to you. Are you in the right place? And if not, how do you move yourself using these two dimensions, either increasing the distribution or then growing the sales in those stores that you're in into more desirable position. Next slide, please. And we have two color-coded brands that were brought up from our friends, and they have certainly very different customer or consumer acquisition strategies. So one of them is placed in the high distribution, low sales, so low average sales per store. So is in a lot of stores, but then in those stores, they face a lot of competition from the other brands, and therefore the overall or average sales overall in those stores is lower versus Glasshouse Farms that appeals to a completely different audience and is in the top left quadrant with distribution being lower but generating higher sales in the stores that the brand is in. And that really is the summary of how you can view brands in this 2x2 matrix in this framework, where you can actually start understanding the relative competitive position. And then from here, we're going to switch to actually finding the right product for your customers, which is going to be presented by our VP of Analytics, Liz Connors. So Liz, take it away.
Thanks, Sammy. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz. I'm going to do a couple of quick slides here. So both Blake and Sammy kind of talked about the strategy, one from the point of retailers, two from the point of brands. And I want to talk about the strategy from the point of customers. So it'll be a little bit of both brands and stores here. But to get us started, I want to tie back to one, we have the summer months coming up, and two, some of the things that Jocelyn talked about. So give me a moment to explain this slide to you. I chose an unusual x-axis. I did it on purpose. So if we start there, the x-axis, that's the one on the bottom. If we start on the left, we're starting in May. So the green line would be May of 2019. That's before anyone had heard the word COVID. And that green line progresses all the way up to May of 2020. So kind of right through COVID. And then that orange line starts in May of 2020 and progresses all the way up to today. So I did that on purpose so that we can think about what to expect. Because as Blake brought up, there's a whole lot of products that people have on their shelves. And product assortment tends to grow over time. So here what we're looking at is this distinct number of SKUs in stock on a given day in an average store. So SKUs kind of come in and out of stock. You know, you might stock out of Blue Dream and you stock Girl Scout cookies instead for that day, right? New products come in, new products come out. But this is at any given moment, how many products, how many distinct products are in that store. So Jocelyn, if you want to go to the next slide for me, I'm going to highlight a couple time periods. So here we're looking at the time period of May through August. So if we look, one of the things we note last year is the declining number of SKUs in a store. So a SKU had fewer and fewer distinct products available through the summer of last year. Part of that was COVID. There were actually, I don't know if we've all put it out of mind, but during COVID of last year, there were a lot of distribution issues. There were a lot of questions in California about what was and was not oh gosh, mandatory business? No, I'm totally blanking on the word. But the businesses that were allowed to stay open, there were wildfires going on, there were riots. So it was difficult to get the right products, essential businesses. Thank you, Rachel Smith. Yeah, so there were a lot of questions about what was essential at the time. So it led to a lot of supply chain disruptions. It led to a lot of companies, shut down for a period of time. So we did see those SKU counts kind of start to come down. Jocelyn, if you go to the next slide, though, what we saw happen both last year, so this is in the fall, we're looking kind of Labor Day into New Year's. So fall through the winter, in both years, we saw the distinct number of SKUs that a retailer had in stock climb. Now, one thing that I want to note as we think about these climbing, shelf space probably didn't climb, right? It's not like retailers added 10% more shelf space. So this was the shelves getting a little more cluttered. Like Blake brought up, we do want to have a lot of inventory, a lot of assortment available for our customers. We want them to have lots of choices, but sometimes there are too many choices. And so something that happens through the fall and into the winter, and part of that is as we get harvests and things like that, there's new exciting products. We want to stock those, but that is a time where we see SKU counts distinct SKU counts, assortment counts grow. So Jocelyn, if you want to advance for me one more. So here we're looking at those doldrums of winter, kind of two different trends here. So we see a little bit up, a little bit down, but really this isn't a growthy period for us. And then finally, Jocelyn, the last period. There we go. So the most number of distinct SKUs a store has in stock has been 420. The last 2 years in a row, that's when the most assortment existed. So you can see that today we're at the highest point we've ever been at for a number of SKUs in stock. We were on 420, that has started to come down a little. This might be a very good time for you to think about paring back those SKUs that aren't as important to you. So those things at the far end of the spectrum that Blake was telling you about, those SKUs might not be quite as important. And this might be a good time to pare back because we tend to grow our assortment through the fall. So you're about to go into this kind of August through September through October where we see those SKU counts grow. So before you go add those new and interesting products, you might want to trim back on the stuff behind. Now the thing that usually I hear, so I've worked with a lot of retailers, I've worked in retail for a lot of years. I have made the recommendation to a lot of people to trim their assortment. That is one of the most common recommendations I give to retailers that are struggling to grow their sales. The very first thing everybody says, every single one of them says, but Liz, I can't get rid of any of these products. I can't. I need all of them or customers won't come to my stores. This very dusty product all the way in the back that hasn't had a sale for a year, I need that or else people won't come to my store. And so what I want to talk about is that true? So I'll give you a quick spoiler. It's not. And I did bring just a little bit of data about it. No, you're fine. You're fine. You were anticipating me. That's perfect. So here I have a chart. So we're looking at customers that came into stores over a 90-day period. We're looking at customers that came in at least 2 times. These are usually the bulk of your customers, or the bulk of your sales, are customers that over a 90-day period will shop at least twice. So what we find is of those people, only 3% of them bought a single SKU. So they came in twice, they bought that product today, and they came in, 2 months from now, and they bought that exact same product. 50% of these customers bought at least 2 to 4 different products in their trips. And a full 45% of them bought 5 or more products. So getting rid of any single SKU is likely to not upset very many customers. Only 3% of them really buy the exact same product every time. But let's talk about that 5+, right? There on the left, because that might be the one that's popping up in your head and you're saying to yourself, well, these customers really want a lot of assortment. So these people that buy at least 5 distinct products, these are just flower products, mind you, and flower shoppers. These are not all of the products in your store. I'm just looking at flower today to make it a little simpler. So these people that bought at least 5 products, I've got to have a ton of products in my store for them. Well, Jocelyn, if you can advance to the next slide, I want to give one more data point before you think about that too much. So 83% of a store's flower customers will buy over a 90-day period one of the top 25 products. So really more than 80% of your customers are really only shopping in those top 25 flower products that you have in your store. So remember, I was telling you the median store on any given day, any day, they have about today 150, 200 distinct flower products in stock. Those shelves have 150 distinct little rows, little jars, right? But really 83% of customers when they come in are going to grab one of those top 25 jars. Next, if we think about the bottom 25 products, oh, you took away my best point. All right, here it is. If we think about those bottom 25 products, that might have been my cue to go faster, huh? We took away those bottom 25 products. Less than 1% of customers, it's actually 0.7% of customers purchased only those bottom products. So it's very rare for someone to be purchasing just those long tail products of yours, just your niche products. And so even if we're going to get rid of just those things on the very long tail that Blake was pointing out, there's very few customers that won't be coming into your store. And so what you really need to focus on as you think about what are the best products to stock are those top products that bring in the right kind of customers. And so as we think about that, I actually want to pass it over to Angela to show some data that we helped prepare for her to talk about some of CannaCraft's customers and what those customers are like.
Thanks so much, Liz. We're really lucky that that we're able to work with Headset to bring these industry insights to help our industry partners and our industry grow as a whole. So being able to work with Liz and the team really helps us in order to make really great data-driven decisions. So it's a company that's really well represented across all categories. We work really hard to work with our customers to figure out what's the right assortment, because we want to make sure that our partners' working capital is really working hard for them and not stale in the back, stuck in the inventory room. So that really starts with understanding what's their customer base. So who's coming to your store? What are they dropping into their baskets? How much are they spending? And more importantly, as brands, how can we drive traffic to your store? Understanding that that summer is coming, getting that right assortment for the seasonal mix. We're really fortunate that we have brands across all of these categories like Absolute Extract, Care by Design, Farmer and Felon, Hi-Fi Hops, and Loud and Clear. So, for every single category that you have within your store, and depending on your customers, we have the right brand and the products for you. We have on average about 180 SKUs that you can choose from. So it's working more closely with you to figure out what is that right mix. Next slide, please. So what we know is that in terms of the value of CannaCraft customers, that on average, a CannaCraft customer will spend more than $100. So that's really great because that's 80 to 28% larger than an average cart size. So an average basket in California is about $89, but a CannaCraft shopper spends on average $113. That means that whether it's flower, edibles, or with vapes, if they're dropping a CannaCraft product in their basket, you're going to have a customer who's going to spend more than $100, and that means value. And on an ongoing basis, that means incremental cart sizes that help with average order value. Next slide, please. And also, looking at overall CannaCraft product retail sales, which has been soaring and been doing really, really well, cannabis sales totaled $427.9 million in March, and 25 plus came from the same month, more than the same month last year. And customers who are CannaCraft product shoppers actually make 5 extra trips to a dispensary, or they order 5 extra times. When an average cannabis consumer in California would make 8 trips, our shoppers actually make 13 trips. That means that our consumers shop more frequently on average, and that they actually spend more. So we're really excited that our consumers are able to drive more value for you. Next slide, please. Higher value products within that assortment mix, you don't want your products to be not moving in your store. And so when we look at fair share ratio, we know that in terms of our flower, we have a fair share ratio of 1.9, which means that it's 3% of SKUs, but it drives a little bit more than 3% of flower sales. And with beverages, it's even better that we have about 19% of SKUs, but we drive over 21% of beverage sales. And with tinctures and sublinguals, we only have 13% of SKUs, but we drive 16% of total tincture sales. That means that our products move, and we have that trust and reliability to know that we're able to bring more customers to you. Next slide, please. And then that's back to Jocelyn for us to be able to wrap up on this really great, insightful webinar. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Angela. That was so great. Okay, awesome, everyone. Such wonderful insights shared. Thank you, Angela, Blake, Liz, Ron, Sammy. So many great takeaways from y'all today. Several things we learned. We learned that not every brand fits every consumer. So you shouldn't expect every brand to fit in your retail assortment. We also learned that because our industry, the California market, has just been rather unstable over the last year plus, we should try to avoid referencing previous summers or seasonal data when building out an assortment strategy. And lastly, we learned that there can be a lot of bad eggs in your assortment, so knowing how to identify them is key. And the good news is that, as you saw today, there's tools to help you identify the good versus bad assortment and methodologies such as ABC, XYZ analysis to help. So we're going to do some Q&A. So please drop your questions in the chat box, and our team is going to pick a few to answer. And if there's more questions, we're going to be compiling all these and answer them in a blog post early next week. And okay, here we go. You know, you would think that I would know how to navigate this Zoom better at this point and get our videos going here, but thank you for bearing with me for some of this today. Hopefully everyone can see now. There we go. All right, we made it. Okay, so let's get some Q&A going.
Jocelyn, one I wanted to point out while you're finding some of those questions is Angela pointed out the fair share ratio, which is yet another way to analyze how well a brand is performing for you. And what I want to point out is how that very much correlates or goes together with the ABC-XYZ analysis that Blake did. And so that ABC-XYZ analysis that Blake did is something that is coming into our retailer premium tool soon. And based on the analysis Angela did, what that means is if you are stocking CannaCraft products and you go in there and you see what are the ones that are in that good side of the graph that Blake pointed out, you're much more likely to find CannaCraft products over in that good side of the graph. So a fair share analysis is just a similar way. It's a little more precise because we're getting all of those continuous variables, whereas Blake puts them into nice tidy buckets for people like me who don't want to just have a ton of numbers everywhere like I'm in the matrix. But what that means is we hope that if you do have this new retailer premium module, whenever it launches, you'll see those CannaCraft products at the top.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to hit y'all with some questions that have come in. So question number one, so is this more of a 65-35 rule based off some of the data? And this came up during one of the slides that was talking about the 80%.
Yeah, I can take that one. So not necessarily. So the 65% would be if we're saying that we're talking about the one of those numbers will account for the number of SKUs, so the SKU share, and then the other number would account for the percentage of sales. So when I said that 35%, that 35% means 35% of SKUs drove 80% of sales. So that would mean that 65% of SKUs drove 20% of sales, excuse me, not scales. So not necessarily. So the 35, it's not 80-20, it's really more like 80-35 in cannabis in California.
Cool. Thank you, Blake. All right, another one. Is House Brand the house brand of the dispensary?
Yes, it is. Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
No, go ahead. Yes.
It is, yeah. So a lot of dispensaries, it's common in some markets and not uncommon as others, but a lot of dispensaries will have their very own brand that they brand things as at Headset rather than forecast those individual sales for the retailers to protect retailer privacy. What we do is we lump that all into house brand. So if you're not super familiar with house brand, it's really common in CPG. Anytime you go to the store and instead of buying like the Honey Made graham crackers, you buy the Bummer Kroger brand graham crackers, that would be a house brand. Though for cannabis, it's not always a Bummer. Sometimes it's actually quite premium, which is a little bit different than traditional CPG.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Okay, we've got a question for Angela. What has her team found is the most effective way to drive customer traffic to CannaCraft's valued retailers, both storefront and delivery partners?
Okay, so this is about how do we drive customers to retailers?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, we've actually leaned pretty hard in terms of customer data and also programmatic media. So we're actually able to work directly with a retailer, do a geolocation in terms of geofencing, identify, let's look at, we want to support the sell-through of vapes for a certain period of time. We can actually identify who are the customers who's purchased a vape product in the last 60, 90, 100 days, and we'll actually serve them programmatic ads to be able to incentivize them to come to that partner retailer for that particular purchase. So we can get pretty granular in terms of programmatic media now, and seen some really great results with that. You know, we've seen anywhere from 3 to 9 times ROAS on these type of programmatic buys in support of our retailers for sell-through.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, question for Liz. Are the skewed trends partly attributed to outdoor harvest availability?
Yeah, I think that they very much are. It's forecasting in cannabis and in analyzing trends in cannabis, especially time series trends, is still a fun business. We don't have a lot of data. You know, when you're trying to forecast beer sales, we can go back to the 1300s if we want. With cannabis, we have much more limited data. But I think that it's probably fair to say those two things are true, especially around outdoor harvest. We see a lot of like really cool new stuff coming to the market. It might be limited release. And so it doesn't mean that it's terrible to grow your SKU count or your assortment during that time. I think that's okay. We just want to make sure that we're doing it mindfully and not overwhelming our customers. So there's some really cool consumer analysis out there called Paradox of Choice. So I know a lot of people are about to have their lunchtime. If you want to Google Paradox of Choice, the jelly studies, and read about that on your lunch break, I think that'll be a good way for you to kind of think about how we get things that interest people without becoming that Cheesecake Factory menu. I mean, even just the fact that I brought up that menu, y'all were like, oh, anxiety, right? Who knows what I want? There's too many choices.
Yeah, that's a great point. I loved reading about that jelly study. So useful. So truly like a very valuable use of your time or your lunch spent.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. I'll find a link and link it out to all panelists in a moment while people are answering questions.
Awesome. That would be great. And then just one more to kind of close us out here. And this is more from Headset's end. And this is, we have a lot of retailers that are on this call today. And so one of the things that I think is really important for them that they want to understand is how can you use the reorder tool to the fullest? How to read the data and make the best decisions for reordering products. So Liz, maybe this is best for you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let me send that link so I do the things I promise. So the reorder report is meant to help you understand how much to order. So the reorder report is for when you want to keep the items in stock. So you're looking to see, how many of product A should I order this week to meet demand. For me, if I were running a store, the way that I would use it to its fullest is to make sure that I'm thinking about the time period I'm looking at. So remember, you're using historical sales to forecast how many things will be ordered, as well as one of the big not mistakes, but overlooks that I see people make is they forget about the lead time. So if you send an order out to one of your suppliers, it's not going to get there in like 1 minute. It's not going to get there in 15 minutes. These aren't Domino's pizza orders that you're putting in. And so we have buffer days in there. And the point of buffer days is to say, well, I want to order a 2-week supply. I know it usually takes the vendor, 3 or 4 days to get to me. So I'm going to put in those buffer days so that I do have enough. The other thing that I want to say is most of the stuff we talked about today, especially the stuff Blake talked about, was less about making sure we have enough of the products we're carrying and more about making sure we have the right assortment. That's often called Skew Rationalization. And you go through an exercise and you literally rationalize, should I carry this product? Today in Headset, we don't have great tools to help you do that, but everything Blake showed you is getting built into a module that hopefully will launch soon. That will help you be able to do that analysis on your own. So you can go in and find those top performers and know which products are really driving customers into stores. And you can also find those bottom performing products so that you can have the breakup talk.
And Liz, on this, okay, so in the beginning, I talked about how Cannacraft is also using our bridge product. And so that reorder number, so this is the thing. So they'd love to connect with all of their retail partners, old and hopefully some new ones today. And what this is going to do, so Ron's going to be in the platform looking at Bridge, and he's going to see, okay, this retailer is about to be out of stock on this product. I better hit up my girl, Courtney Wu, and Courtney is going to hit up you, NorCal retailers, and be like, hey, you're going to be out of stock in X number of days. Do you want to place an order? So this is going to help y'all collaborate. It's going to help y'all connect. So this is a really cool tool. I don't know of anything else on the market that is helping retailers and brands collaborate like this. So it's awesome to partner. We hope that you guys can get set up on that. And that's all our time for today. So this was so great. Thank you everyone for joining us. The slides, this recording, it's going to be out in the next day or two. So please share what you learned, tell your friends, and come and join us again. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody.